We've seen what happens when we select the piece of music that works and spot the cue so it supports the scene. But what happens when you want to keep the music going, but the scene changes in some way so the music is no longer the right tone, or its beats no longer fall to places where you want them to? Remember, in the scene from Castles, we placed a number of markers in the middle of the cue. We knew that it was going to start by accenting Joseph's sense of desperation and failure and end as Patton enters the scene to remind him of that failure. But we also put two other markers inside the cue. One for when the montage of him working begins, and another when we realize that he has failed at this work. Well, what happens if we want to accent the moment when the montage begins and we see him start working? Let's listen to how that moment works right now. Doesn't really change at all, does it? That means that we are missing the opportunity to have the audience lean forward here and experience that desperation with Joseph. So we're going to be looking for music that accents his desperate attempt to succeed right here, his sad try at it. He is busy working here, maybe even very busy if we look at the edits, though he never stops being sad, according to the adjectives we came up with for the scene. So perhaps we should look at other pieces of music, ones that start where we want them to start, with the adjectives and emotions that we want the cue to start with, and then change at this precise moment to a new set of adjectives. Well, the likelihood of finding a piece of music that fits those exact specifications is very, very small. So let's try another alternative. Let's start with the cue that we've already selected and liked. And let's find another piece of music that works for the montage area. We'll then figure out a way to segue from one to the other. If we have to, we'll even figure out a way to transition out of this new music as the montage ends and go back into the depression-type music that we see he has at the third marker. So let's go back into our music library and start trying out some pieces. Since it takes a bunch of time to download and edit pieces into the timeline, let's just listen to them first. So here's our first try. Wow, that's actually pretty good. We really lucked out. So let's try that piece in the area that we've already marked. Well, the second piece works well, but it segues terribly from the first piece. It's very abrupt and doesn't feel like a real transition for Joseph. As an audience, I'd feel manipulated here. And our job as filmmakers is to manipulate the audience without them feeling being manipulated. So what can we do? There are two alternatives. First, you can start looking for yet another piece of music. Once again, that could take forever and maybe get the same bad results. This is where the second alternative comes in. We can edit the musical piece so it is shaped the way we want it to be shaped. Some editors are afraid of music editing. It seems much more mysterious than picture editing. They've tried to make music cuts before by chopping something out and doing a short dissolve between the remaining pieces. That usually ends up sounding bad. But the key is maintaining rhythm and also making your changes in ways that won't be so obvious. Of course, not every music cut is going to work, but let's try out one for this sequence from Castles. You'll notice from the waveform on this cue in our timeline that it's quite busy at the top and then moves into a regular beat. We can also see that later on down in the cue that there is also a regular beat. So now let's cut from the first regular beat to the later one. You'll notice that this moves the later part of the cue up and attaches it onto the strumming part at the top of the cue. So let's listen to the cut and see how it sounds. I'll add a little musical dissolve between the two. You will notice that I've moved the cue so that That transition happens at the montage.
Mr. Dalton sent me to collect a design. Is it ready?
Wow, that's not very good. So let's try dissolving out earlier so we hear the two pieces gradually merge.
Mr. Dalton sent me to collect a design. Is it ready?
Not bad, but what would happen if we drop that added piece at the beginning of the second cue altogether?
Mr. Dalton sent me to collect a design. Is it ready?
Now that's great. This experimenting is creating a piece of music that is pleasingly shaped to the needs of Joseph's story. The only thing that we might want to finesse would be getting out of this piece in a more subtle way when Joseph is in his office, having totally failed. Using music to shape your scene sometimes requires that you change your music to adapt to the story of your scene. But if you know the story of your movie, and you know the story of your scene, and you've discovered your lean forward moments, then it makes all that work so much easier.